Resource Watch is brought to you in association with Tebe Investment Corporation.
The history of coal mining in South Africa is closely linked to the economic development of the country. We speak to a captain of the industry, which is South Africa's third largest source of foreign exchange. Welcome to Resource Watch. I'm Sipho Nkosi. Let's kick off with the market wrap for this week.
Miners in Zambia will no longer have to produce import certificates from destination countries in order to claim tax refunds. The country's tax authority announced this will apply from September 8th. Zambia is Africa's second biggest copper producer, and mining companies had complained the requirement was impractical. A solid performance from its platinum and ferrous divisions has increased full-year headline earnings by 9.5% for South African mining group Africa Rainbow Minerals. ARM Platinum's performance is in stark contrast to the wider South African industry, which was hammered by a 5-month wage strike this year. And Botswana's Department of Environmental Affairs has approved Australian-listed African Energy's 300-megawatt Sese integrated coal and power project. It covers a 1.6 million tonne a year mining operation and coal processing and handling plant, as well as a 300 megawatt coal-fired power station.
South Africa produces in excess of 255 million tonnes of coal and consumes almost 3/4 of that domestically. We're speaking to Sipho Nkosi, the CEO of South Africa's fourth largest coal producer and the biggest supplier of coal, Exxaro. Sipho, thank you so much for making the time to join us. I think a good place for us to start off our conversation is by reflecting back on your most recent results. What stood out for you as highlights in what you produced?
Well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, it signaled the fact that the mining industry, I don't care which commodity you're talking about, we're in a very difficult period. So if you look at the results across the board, they will indicate to you that the commodities business is really facing quite a lot of headwind. So that's the first thing that we see. And therefore, the key thing in order to survive out of that is to ensure that you manage your business such that you are always on the lower side of the cost curve. And this is why we can and could produce the result that we produced. So the result that happened, it's not because the market was exciting and everything was exciting. It's because people had to dig deep to get to where we were.
Given that the tough environment that you've just described, do you get a sense that you've had to change your game plan to ensure that you continue to give back dividends to your shareholders and you continue to produce the numbers that we've seen?
Yeah, indeed. And that's why when we talk to people about diversifying our business, because if you do not diversify the business and look at other markets, you're going to have a problem. Firstly, our biggest market in South Africa has always been Eskom. And that's a very good market and it served the organization very well. But you cannot rely on that one alone. And therefore you have to develop and diversify to another market, which is your export market. And you looked at that, and hence the deal that we've just done with Total.
Yes.
And then you look at another market, which may, in the eyes of people, be small. And that is where we're producing char. For the ferrochrome industry. It's got good returns, except that now it's also under pressure. But it's another diversification strategy in order to look at that. Then you look at other markets like your metallurgical market and all the others. You're also looking at things like, you say, okay, there's a challenge. Eskom are building power stations to a particular level. Yeah. But we've been allowed as a country to work with IPPs. So IPPs is another market that has become available to the coal producers. Yeah. And therefore it makes more sense to diversify into that market. Now, when all these markets are humming, things go well, but that's not normal. You will find that when the other market is not doing well, the other one is doing better. Right now, the export market is a bit depressed, and yet the stable Eskom business keeps us alive and keeps our shareholders getting dividends. And that's why it is important to diversify your risk and manage that one.
You've also mentioned earlier on in your response that one needs to look at other markets. Maybe let's talk about some of the markets that are on your radar. Where are we likely to see you penetrating in the medium to long term?
The export market, particularly the Asian market,
yes,
that's the market, that's the growth market. Europe is no longer a growth market. The Americas have put in quite a lot of coal, or are putting quite a lot of coal into the US, and so are Colombians and Venezuelans. So we as South Africans are battling, in some instances, to deliver coal, say to Rotterdam, more competitively than the Americas and the others. So it becomes a bit challenging. But the big growth in the mining sector, in the coal business, is in the Far East. And that's why all of us converge towards that.
Just staying on Eskom before we move on, recently in the last few days you've made that announcement of a new supply arrangement for Medupi in particular. Just talk to us in terms of the nuts and bolts of what that arrangement means and what it means for your balance sheet as well.
Remember, we spent over 10.2 billion expanding the mine so that it would supply Medupi Power Station. And of course, because of the we didn't move and conclude and finish our projects at the same time. That is Eskom finishing Medupi so that it is ready, and we were ready probably before them. And the contract talks to certain penalties or clauses, or you have to compensate the other one who has spent more money. My shareholders have spent money, and they can't just wait and take the burn around that time. So the agreement says, if you, Exxaro, were not ready and Eskom is ready, you pay this. And if you, Exxaro, are ready and Eskom, no, this is the arrangement. So this is what we're looking at. We're saying, because of the delays that have been there, what is it? How can you compensate us?
Yes.
So it takes three forms. The first one is the shortfall that we could have made had we supplied the coal, and it's there. The second one would look at things like, well, we sign an agreement for take or pay. That's another one. The third one is whatever coal we would have delivered at that time. That one as well. And those three layers then constitute what we receive from Eskom.
And then I maybe want to change track. I want us to just look at your African experience. Of course, one of the key things that journalists latched onto when we looked at your results was the impairments that you saw in the DRC. What has been the biggest lesson that you've taken from that?
Well, I mean, I'm the first one to say to people, under normal circumstances, if we're approaching a project, there are certain steps that we follow as the company. I mean, if you look at all the projects, the one that we've just done at GG, expanding the mine, you start from your concept study to your pre-feas, feasibility, bankable, and all those, and get the agreements ready before you start. Now, the situation in ROC was different in the sense that we bought the project from someone else who had made certain commitments. One of the commitments was that we will start by 2013 to produce. So when you buy with commitments.
Right.
When we looked at things and in agreement with them as well as government, we were certain that all conditions would have been met, such as getting all the agreements on time. That never happened. And as a result, there was delays after delays after delays after delays. And we got to a point where we were saying, you know what, until we get these things sorted out, then there's a problem. So, and of course, during that time, I mean, the 2 years of waiting, it's not good enough. And in terms of costs, the costs start escalating, and then it becomes problematic. And probably the lesson then that you learn out of that is that if you have a system and a structure, I think up front you've got to start negotiating those things and probably changing those things, and not necessarily say I'm beholden on this one that is there, because that's going to cause you problems going forward. I think that's really the biggest lesson.
And just finally, I mean, if we look across the mining landscape, we're consistently hearing of companies saying that they're reviewing their assets, they're moving towards more mechanization, and there's always these warning bells or fears, especially amongst the unions, that this might actually mean more jobs. And it all boils down to the key question of, is South Africa still as attractive as other emerging markets as a mining investment destination?
South Africa has got minerals. It's one of the key destinations around the world. We cannot run away from that. In terms of infrastructure, South Africa still has good infrastructure. So those components are there. In terms of financing, South Africa is still there. The difficulty, of course, is, it doesn't mean that South Africa is now, or the mining industry in South Africa, it's sunset industry, as people will say. There's been quite a lot of turmoil in the industry in South Africa. We cannot run away from that. Whether we look at how we interpret legislation, whether we look at how we as the labor movement behave, and how we as bosses behave, all of us have done one thing or the other. That probably has caused the industry to be in the state. And as a result, we need, therefore, to pool our resources together and make it work. When people are talking about mechanization, it's because you've got to deal with costs in any organization. But you cannot just mechanize just for the sake of mechanizing. South African mining industry was designed for low labor costs. That was there. So it's always been like that. There are areas where you can mechanize, and there are mines that you cannot mechanize. So when people talk about mechanization, we need to just be careful. So it is going to happen because it is important for us to manage our costs, but at the same time we should take cognizance of the reality that not every mine lends itself to that.
Taking cognizance of reality, I think we'll wrap our conversation there. Sipho, thank you so much for making the time to join us. That was Sipho Nkosi, the CEO of Exxaro. In our gem of the week, we usually look at uses of elements mined from the earth. Today, we're looking at wrought iron. Historians believe that the Egyptians were the first people to work with small amounts of iron some 5,000 or 6,000 years ago.
Wrought iron is an alloy which consists of very low carbon content, in contrast to cast iron. Before the development of effective methods of steelmaking, wrought iron was the most common form of malleable iron.
Wrought iron goes back hundreds of years. It used to be made by a blacksmith using a furnace and an anvil and a hammer. And every single piece he made had to be heated up and beaten into shape. And clearly that's a very time-consuming process. And it's not economically feasible to do that any longer.
Before items such as nails, wires, chains and rails were produced from mild steel, these items were made of wrought iron.
You can design it to be very simple and plain, or you can design it to be very ornate. It's a very durable product, very strong product, it's easy to maintain. So it can be used in a great variety of ways, some expensive, some not expensive.
The demand for wrought iron saw a decline as mild steel quality problems such as brittleness was solved. Today, cheaper, more lightweight materials such as aluminium and other alloys have largely replaced true wrought iron in many home applications, despite the greater durability of the product.
That's it for this week's show. Do stay in touch following me at Nozipho, and don't forget that our hashtag is ResourceWatch. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.